giving everybody a chance to get logged in. Be sure in the chat screen in the chat box to let us know where you're from. We've got people from all over the world participating, and actually our panelists are from all over as well. So as usual, it is a global event for the Global Institute of Church Management. We are really looking forward to today's conversation. We should be starting in just a couple of minutes. Again, we're going to give you all time to sign in. We'd love to know where you're from and just hear your stories. So again, you feel free to use that chat box so that you can say hello to the group. I always enjoy seeing how many people are here from different parts of the world. And I think we'll be able to get started in just a moment. So, all right. So welcome, I'm Dr. Pia De Saleni. I am the President and Executive Director of the Global Institute of Church Management. This is the fifth, if I'm correct, episode series in our global this is the fifth episode in our Managing the Assets of the Church webinar series, and we're focusing on creative financing. I'm very excited. We saw in the beginning when we started this series in September that there was a big need for a conversation about creative financing, because we focused the first 4 discussions, you might remember, on real estate with a lead up to our April conference in Rome. And you can go to our website, gicm.org, to sign up for more information on our real estate conference with the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate at Notre Dame. So it's been very fun working with the Fitzgerald Institute. But right away in that first series, I realized that we need to talk about creative financing, because so many of you are people like myself. We have backgrounds in theology and academia or policy and academia, and we often end up in leadership roles that we weren't trained for. Now, I was a student of PCM, and before I took this role, and those are 2 separate events. We can talk about those another time. But I think it's really important because we have big ideas. Those of us in ministry tend to have big ideas, and we don't necessarily know how to execute them, how to find the funding for them. And things can seem we make them, I think, overwhelmingly complicated simply because of our lack of expertise. And if there's one thing I've learned that continues to be, I learned it before GICM and it continues to be underscored in my work with GICM, is the value of networking and finding people that you can work with who can help you. And the question, we don't have to know everything. We just have to know other people who can help. And if you know lots of people who know lots of things, then you get close to knowing everything. So with that, I want to welcome our panelists today. We're joined by Rienzie Biolena. He's the President and Chief Financial Planner of WealthArki and Consultancy Incorporated. He also works for the Archdiocese of Lipa in the Philippines. We're joined by Clint Weber, President and CEO of the Advancement Foundation for the Catholic Diocese of Fort Worth here in Texas in the United States. And finally, we're joined by Rienzie Nakva, who is an NGO senior executive and has worked both with the Order of Malta in France and with Jesuit Relief Services in Rome. I had the pleasure of meeting Rienzie in Rome, I think it was back in June, and it's just been great to see. Again, this is a perfect example of someone who has great skills that can help people in ministry to advance their missions. So with that, I want to turn to Rienzie. Rienzie, can you tell us a little bit about your work and what you've seen? You've been in church ministry. You've also been in the for-profit finance world. How do you see what's been your experience, and especially a positive experience of the church using creative financing? And by creative, I want to make clear that we're talking about legal financing. This is all legal, but we do have to be creative in terms of accessing resources and maximizing our assets. So with that, Rienzie, I'll turn to you. Thank you.
Yeah, so good morning, everybody. Good morning to our participants and attendees from all over the world. Yeah, actually, Pia, I'm not new to church financing. Ever since I was a young person, I was really active in youth ministry. So even before I was with our youth ministry, and I was, handling finance as well. So this is a full circle for me, Pia. Yeah, even since well, there had been some challenges in terms of financing for church projects because we're just into donations before. Well, this was with my prior diocese. So yeah, church donations, and even you go from parish to parish in even financing your youth ministry projects. But as you go deeper and inside the church finance, so you have to be more creative. In my current parish right now in Jesus the Divine Healer Parish, we've had some stewardship of treasure program. So apart from the regular church collection, we've had that stewardship of treasure program before. Of course, it has its own catechesis, teachings about us being stewards of our treasures, our worldly temporalities. So apart from the regular church collections, we've had that program. Yeah, our parish had the accounting for that. Like, for example, every first Sunday, we have had that stewardship of treasure. So even the parishioners would be having their little envelopes, offering that to the church. And then, of course, there's an accounting for that one. Official receipts have been issued for all contributions and parishioners. And with that experience, I think that we've been able to up our parish's collection in our own parish, no, by about, if I may, that would be around $30,000 per month in the Philippines. That's big amount already. Okay, so yeah, it's a very, very big boost, such that during time of the pandemic, we didn't experience such downturns in terms of finances. That's in our parish, in our own parish. But for the Archdiocese of Lipa, okay, well, we've had our placements for different time buckets. Like, we've had, in order to maximize our money, so we've leveraged into money market funds for our short-term funds. The Archdiocese also have its own real estate company holding. So right now, we've had about 41 lessees. Among those, we've had convenience stores, a McDonald's there. We also have the cell tower there. So it's really diversification and maximizing our own assets there. We've also had some farmer lessees as well, in order to help them um, with their livelihood as well. And yeah, with that, we've it contributes to around 30% of our annual budget. That's for the Archdiocese of Lipa. Now, we've also leveraged into, because REITs, or real estate investment trusts, are just new in the Philippines, so we've also leveraged and invested on that one. So yeah, we've had some pretty nice price appreciation in terms of our REIT holdings. We've had some dividends as well, as much as 4 or 5% dividend yield. So those gave us some cash flow. Most especially, it supported us during the pandemic. We've also had an endowment fund for priests, and of course, in terms of fund management, we also leveraged and outsourced our fund management with mutual fund companies, with banks as well, such that at least they take care of our money. So investment into bonds, in the stock market, some corporate issuances as well. And we've also dabbled in financing into some of our affiliates as well, but that's just like 0.50% of our total portfolio, just to help them with their financing as well. And moving forward, as I've worked with the Archdiocese, we've agreed to look outwards already, because currently our portfolio is 100% invested in the Philippines. So that would be risky from a portfolio management point of view. So we're now looking outwards, such that we are now looking into offshore investments as well. So we're looking into global equities, some Asia funds as well, because we see value there. With these particular funds, we're not just looking to price appreciation, but those that give regular dividends. And these funds would be giving monthly dividends. So at least this would provide some support to our diocese moving forward. We're also looking into total portfolio and risk management, because we know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, expenses, most especially health expenses, has shot up. In particular, we've had an experience where hospital bill went up to at least 100,000 US dollars. Okay, so we wanna protect, of course, our finance from those financial shocks. So we are not just looking into growing our portfolio. When we say total portfolio management, it's not just about growing your money, but protecting it from financial shocks as well. So yeah, we're now opening, this is where the creativity comes in. So we're now opening ourselves up into health insurance and life insurance for our dear clergymen, such that we would be protecting our finances, our resources from these financial shocks. I mean, COVID-19 really has upended our finances. So I think that we should be able to protect it as well by going into insurance as well. Apart from that one, yeah, as for the offshore investments, we're looking into like this particular Asia Equity Fund, which gave 12% for the last year. Global Dividend Fund that gave 14% for the last year, and these funds gives around 3 to 4% in terms of dividend yield per annum, but payable monthly. So I guess with those, we'll be able to be more creative with our financing, and not just being creative, but protecting it as well from financial shocks moving forward. And I think that's so far what we can share from the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Lipa in Manila, Philippines, and my own parish in Jesus the Divine here in the Diocese of Parañaque.
Great, thank you, Rienzie. I want to turn to Reggie. Reggie, you came from the for-profit world, and you've been helping the nonprofit world. And I think Rienzie, what you gave was it's just wonderful to see how diverse and really the good stewardship of the church's assets. And Reggie, you've been in some roles where you've had to really, I mean, there's been some culture change. You've had to get people thinking differently about the assets that they have. And I want to have you speak to that. And before I go to you, I just want to remind everybody that you can just submit questions. We'll do Q&A at the end of our seminar at the last 15 minutes or so. So you can submit questions in the Q&A box. Please feel free to submit those questions at any point during the conversation as they come up. Our panelists might answer them as they see them, if it works into their conversation, but we want to be sure that you get your questions answered. And I know that many of you have very practical questions. So again, please use this opportunity to interact with our experts. So Reggie, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pia, and hello, everyone. Nice to be here and to share some of my experience. First as a CEO in the IT industry, and then for the last 8 years in the humanitarian world, especially for Catholic organizations. The main word which came to my mind preparing this webinar was partnership. I think it's the most powerful word to work on creative financing, getting ideas with others, not to be on your own. So let me drop you some ideas of programs I've been through in the last 8 years to try to leverage this partnership spirit and to get some ideas around creative financing. Now, obviously, creative financing, you can see both sides. It can be either maximizing your revenue, but it can also be minimizing your cost. So let's give an example which everyone will understand, and I'm sure has already been through, in terms of minimizing your cost. It's like sharing your properties, your real estate. You probably have using some buildings, and you might not use it full time. So one of the ideas would be to share the space. Either you have a room you don't need. Obviously, you can rent it, or in the same space, you can use it for the day and rent it for the evening, or vice versa. That's an obvious way. I'm sure you are all thinking of, and probably already doing. Now, there's many ways also to leverage from partnership and to diminish your cost. Partnering with companies, you might buy some services from. I'm thinking about pro bono. You might use. Some of you probably have already used some advice from lawyers, from accounting companies, from IT companies. A lot of those companies have their own pro bono programs, which you can use their service for free. I'm thinking of another program in the pro bono spirit, which we did manage with the Order of Malta, with the Knights of Malta. It was we had a delegate. This was with the Orange company, the IT telco company. They delegated someone full time. This was like a pre-retirement program for them, some of their executives, and we could use that person full time in the IT department of the Knights of Malta for free. And it was just actually, the thing was to know that they had this kind of program, and then you submit your own organization to benefit from those people that would be full-time person 1-2 years before they go on retirement. They have a lot of experience, they have all the connection within this company, and it was extremely useful as a support for our own IT department. Let me drop some other ideas. I mean, if we speak about how to be creative, I mean, you can see there's no limit actually in terms of creativity. We realized in Africa that the largest provider of electricity in Africa, Schneider Electric, they were providing solar panels in Africa for many private and public organizations. So they created a school to train young men and women so that they could maintain those electrical panels. Now, one of the ideas was to convince them that they could take on board some of the refugees we were taking care of at the Jesuit Refugee Service. So it was an idea that leveraging on the program existing already in the private world, and to have through the foundation of Schneider Electric, some of the refugees we were taking care of, to enter that school and find a job afterwards. Once again, this was just to leverage a connection that we had within this electricity company. Another idea, this was with the Knights of Malta operating mainly in the health industry, running hospitals and dispensaries in Europe and in Africa. Once again, it was a meeting, after a meeting with a large fruit corporation producing fruits from Africa. They had a big problem because they had a plantation, very isolated in Africa, very far from any health service. So we were thinking with them, how can we help them to create this kind of hospital for their thousands of employees in this plantation, very remote from any large city. So we managed to have a partnership with them. They paid for the hospital itself and for the personnel, and we agreed with them that we would run the hospital for them if they agreed that at least half of the hospital was dedicated to the locals, to the local population, the poor and the homeless from this region of Africa. So finally, they were happy because they had the best service they could ever imagine in this hospital, very up-to-date, very modern hospital. They paid for everything. But for us, as a humanitarian organization, we could provide the same quality of service to the poor and the homeless in this region of Africa. So this was extremely successful, and it was really a win-win situation. Now, one of the things you should think of, it's not only to gain new donors and new fund provider, but how to retain them. So I'm sure you're all thinking you already have those kind of programs to keep them informed of what you're doing on a constant basis, like with a newsletter, but also to create some kind of programs for your best fund providers, your best sponsors, organizing like a best donor circle, or inviting them to meetings, or potentially to webinars, conferences, and even travels. What we were doing at the Jesuit Refugee Service was inviting some of our best donors from the US, from Europe, from anywhere, to visit the camps. We took them with us, and they visited the camps. They met our teams. They understood our work, our local work. And this is the best way to get them on board and to get their loyalty over the years. Then it's not becoming like a one-shot donation, but it's a planned multi-year donation over time, which makes a big difference for your finance, obviously. Now, I could go to many other examples, but I think I gave a little idea of how to be creative using partnerships, using the people you're meeting, getting ideas, and potentially agreeing on partnership programs.
Thank you so much, Rienzie. That was one of the things that I really enjoyed in our prep session last week, was just how innovative you were with the partnerships. It was great to hear. It's just a tremendous witness. Clint, I want to turn to you. So you went into run this foundation for the Diocese of Dallas-Fort Worth, and we had, you're coming from, again, the outside world into the church. And how did you begin to kind of, I think sometimes for the church, it seems like the best management practices in finance and creative financing can seem a little bit too worldly or overwhelming. Can you tell us about that transition for you, how you came into the church and kind of helped to change that culture and to embrace a dynamic and creative approach towards finances?
Sure can. Thank you. It'll be tough to follow Rienzie and Reggie. They've been at this a lot longer than I have, and have some great ideas. I love the partnership ideas and other things. I should say we are the Diocese of Fort Worth. That makes, so we are in Texas. If we were in Dallas, then we probably wouldn't be in Texas. If there's anybody else who's on there from Texas, they would probably understand that. So I always get that jab in with our diocese next door in Dallas, but that's kind of an inside joke. Just an inside joke here in the United States. So thank you for the introduction. Coming out of, here's what I would say has been the biggest challenge for me, coming out of a private direct investment and private equity, and where it's all about the money and it's all about the risk-adjusted return. When we think about coming out of that into the church and the use of creative financing, first I had to define what was creative financing. What does that mean? What are those limits? And how do we create that box so that we don't get ourselves into trouble? And so I thought about that, and I came up with 4 things as I started. First, it's got to be mission aligned or mission supportive. What does that mean? What's our mission? Our mission is the salvation of souls, period. That's it. To get people to know, love, and serve God. Now, that can seem a bit esoteric sometimes, but through prayer, and I honestly mean that, real authentic prayer in everything that we do. And then in addition to understanding that all of those good works that we do, whether it's supporting a high school or the poor or medical care or preferential treatment for the poor or refugees, have to be tied back to that mission. And we have to remember that. That's what mission alignment is to us in the Advancement Foundation. I will also throw in there a caveat. I saw a participant in the chat room in accordance with canon law. Canon law will trip you up when you start working with financing and properties or trying to do things in a creative way. So I would just say it's, I think it's smart to any time that you're looking to do any kind of a public-private partnership that might involve equity or shared property or leverage, to bring a canon lawyer in sooner rather than later, especially if you're working for a diocese. I think some of the religious orders may have a bit more leeway there potentially, but especially if you're working for a diocese or around a diocese. So mission aligned, mission supportive, in accordance with canon law, and of course, local law and regulation. It's got to be a competitive cost of capital. I think Reggie, last time I was talking to him, I mean, well, it's got to be competitive economically. So on the cost of capital side, if you're going to use creative financing, it can't be creative just to be creative. It has to be creative so that you can create a lower cost. And that's part of it with the financing. But the other part of it is what the other two gentlemen have talked about, which is you've got to be creative on the operations side. You have to watch your margins. You have to watch your fixed costs, your variable costs. You have to think about the different ways that you can work with people so that your operating business can support the leverage that you might choose to put on your operating business in support of the mission or on the property itself. One of the things we try to talk about here at the foundation every day is we like to buy expertise and own it and not rent it. And clearly that's happening all over the world in the church with the other two gentlemen that have talked. And we know that the church is doing creative things. But I know that sometimes, at least here in the United States, we kind of start to get in this rut where we think about, well, maybe we're just not really good at these things, or we get overwhelmed, or we feel as though we don't have the right competency. There couldn't be anything further from the truth. The church has led in art for thousands of years. It has led in education for thousands of years. It has led in healthcare for thousands of years. And so, and in many cases, creative finance in good ways and bad ways. And we want to make sure we're doing that in good ways. Back to mission alignment and what we're really trying to accomplish or achieve. We want to own that competency. So we want to hire on good young folks that are Catholic or that are associated with the Catholic Church, or find the Catholic Church is a good place for them to go and have a wholesome and healthy work environment where they are respected as human beings for who they are and the way that God created them. And we just feel like if you do that and you take care of people that way and you pay them a just wage, you can get the talent to buy and own those competencies as opposed to feel like you have to rent them out. And then finally, we believe that we got to use the church's strengths. Our strength is in our network, our diocesan network, our religious order network. It's the oldest continuing operating entity in the world. We can go worldwide to find resources to answer questions. And that's on the church side. And then on the network within our own parishes, we have a resource of talented parishioners that are incredible doctors, lawyers, attorneys, finance folks, teachers. Many of them are thinking about ways that they can help, but they may not really know how. So that's what we think of network and the faithful. And then finally, very large landowner. And so to your point, Pia, I think when you kind of kick this whole thing off, we need to take a look at our land and our property and think about it from a value perspective, because that is really where a lot of our value is, and how can we achieve the right value in holding that. So that was the most important thing as I made that transition. If we're going to apply business principles that are sound, let's make sure that they're sound. Let's do it for the right reasons in accordance with the mission. And let's think about building a real organization that's sustainable for the long term.
Thank you, Clint. I'll open this up to any of our panelists. You know, the church has this history of innovation, and it seems that sometimes we get stuck. And Clint, you alluded to this in your comments, but we get stuck thinking, oh, we can't do something. And I've found that too in working with church-affiliated organizations. I sometimes find that I'll go to a meeting and I've been told everything that we can't do, but nobody's told me what we can do. And some people will tell me that I'm just too American, but I like to think that I'm Catholic, and the church has constantly been an innovator, constantly engaged the world, and brought forth developments. Would one of you like to speak to this idea of the church as an innovator? I mean, this is part of the reason. I mean, Clint, you said the first principle is the salvation of souls, and I couldn't agree more. That is precisely what our mission statement is here at the Global Institute of Church Management. We teach these best practices so that the assets of the church are effectively stewarded for the salvation of souls. If it's not for the salvation of souls, I don't know what we're doing here, right? So it seems to me that with this motivation and with the tradition that we have, we kind of have to, I think it's important for those of us that are working in ministry and beginning to take on projects, we have to realize that like innovation is at the core of what it means to be Catholic. Any takers, or should I just ask somebody?
Yeah,
Reggie, I'll
I
go to
just
you. Oh,
okay.
Rienzie, please.
Yeah, just like
No, Rienzie, please.
okay, I just like to have a quick share on that one. Well, this is not with the Archdiocese of Lipa, but here in Manila, Philippines, there's this particular bank who set up a Catholic Values Fund. So I think that could be one good example of really stewarding the church's resources towards its values. Right now, it had a lot of investors from different dioceses and parishes as well. So yeah, I think it's more in line right now as well with the ESG theme that we're seeing right now, the ESG theme of investing. So yeah, I think that that would be a good example of really good stewardship of our resources towards our values. A bank here in the Philippines that had a Catholic Values Fund.
Thank you, Rienzie. Just continuing with this theme of innovation, again, so our students in the program of church management, they have to do a capstone project, it's a project in which they have to manifest that they've understood the hard skills that they've learned at PCM and they can apply them. It's a project that's signed off by their ecclesiastical superior. And I've been really excited. We just went through, yesterday we just got together to virtually, the PCM was in Rome, I'm in California, but we got together to go through the capstones for this year and to see where they're at in their progress. They're about halfway through in terms of delivering the final project. But so many of our students are basically, they've got a great idea and it's going to take a lot of financing, and they're really at ground zero when it comes to understanding where to begin. Reggie or Clint, maybe could you speak to that? Like, where do you begin when you feel like you're at ground zero? You're in an area with limited financial resources. Where do you begin when it seems like you're at ground zero?
It's like working in a startup, if I may. So it's like first defining where you want to go, and giving yourself some goals and objectives. Obviously, sharing this with your team, your network, and then advancing, executing your plan, meeting others. I think what Clint said was absolutely right. You gain your ideas and you can reach your objectives as you use your own network. And it's clear that the network that you all have is much bigger than you think. It can be the network of your parish or where you are, but it's much bigger than that. It's all the people with whom you share your values. So it's extremely large. I'd like to share some of the experience I had with a meeting that was held in Rome called the Laudate Si Challenge, which happened in the last 2 years. Actually, it didn't happen because of the COVID for the last 2 years. So the 2 years before, and you cannot believe some of the largest US companies, which you might not imagine, participate to that meeting. This was under the umbrella of Pope Francis, to find ideas, to be creative. How can we partner large IT companies with Catholic organizations to help the poorest, to help the homeless, to help the refugees? You might find strange that Amazon.com was there, Airbnb was there, very large IT companies were there, but also some of the startups who wanted to help. Some of the startup CEOs were refugees themselves initially, and they got some good business and they wanted to help the others. So using your network, after you know where you want to go, would be and to confront your ideas, to check your ideas, to verify if they are on the good path, and then to confront to the reality.
And Rienzie, during our webinar prep, you mentioned the diplomatic network. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Right. Yeah. Thank you to remind me that it's clear that it is forgotten, that the embassies all over the world, they have their own budgets to help some of the humanitarian programs where they stand. I can tell you all the European countries, they have some what they would call their pocket money, but in fact it might be significant money. You just need to ring the right bell, and they would be very happy to meet you. Those embassies are there to network, and since you're doing a good work locally, this would be recognized, and you can claim some money. I recall a meeting we had this was the French ambassador in the Ivory Coast, and we were looking for money to fund some solar panels. I mean, just in one meeting, we had a good meeting with the ambassador himself, and he called his economic advisor and he said, "How much do we have left for this year?" He gave an amount which was exactly what we needed, and the check was done on the spot. And this is just because we provoked this meeting with the ambassador, and we realized that it was very happy to fund it. And it's true also with the European Commission embassies all over the world. They have as you know, they have an embassy with an economic assistant, which have some money just for that. And if you need some connection with those ambassadors and embassies, the nuncio can be of help too. I did use sometime when I didn't have my own connection with those embassies, I did use the local nuncio. He knows everyone because he's connected, of course, to the diplomatic world, and he can help you to get introductions. Now, it can be done on the spot, as the example I gave, but it can also be a long-term relationship. Cultivating the relationship, your network with embassies, diplomatic missions, the nuncio, and all the large corporations which are implemented in the country you operate is a huge way to leverage your ideas, to get new ideas of partnerships. And it can really be a tremendous help. Once again, there's no limit to creativity. It's just your own willingness, power to convince people that you're doing the right things.
Thank you, Rienzie. I just want to remind again our participants that if you have questions, feel free to submit them in the Q&A box. And when we get towards the end of the webinar, we'll be turning to those questions. Clint, I want to ask you kind of the same question that I asked the others. You know, for someone who's starting a project, they've got a project that they want to launch, they're at ground zero. What advice would you give them? How do you begin to dig out of that hole? And a lot of our students too are from the developing nations. So it's a little bit of a different environment than Fort Worth and many dioceses in the United States. So how do you begin to dig out of ground zero and to move on?
It's a great question. So, you know, I think, as I'd mentioned before, mission alignment and prayer and discernment, all that stuff's important, the salvation of souls. But, you know, God's given us a brain, and he's and we have an education. And so it's incumbent upon us to put forth that effort in order to, you know, to work within the structures that we're given, with the resources that we're given on God's time, to achieve success. How do we do that? You have to know what your objectives are. I think sometimes in the church, one of two things happens. We kind of fall into the proverbial Don Quixote, where perhaps we're fighting the windmill that might not really be the enemy, or we're overwhelmed by, especially in the developing countries. I think that you led with that example, which is, oh my goodness, there's so many problems and there's so many issues. which one do we attack first? So Reggie said, you got to create a set of objectives. And it may be, no more than 3. I say no more than 3, and it may just be 1. And if you're in the developing world, it might just be 1. And then you start solving problems one at a time through working backwards. So you have to know and understand what your outcome is, the desired outcome is, and then back from there, how do you create the specific steps, the specific circumstances, and the specific tasks to achieve that, and put a timeline to it, and then hold yourself accountable. And that's one of my bosses told me a long time ago, hope is a virtue, but it's not a course of action. So, you need both. An example, where would that apply perhaps in the developing world? So, we have a local diocesan Catholic high school that's been around for a long time, since 1961, and has just done some really wonderful things in our diocese. And they were locked inside of our diocesan SNL program, which I don't know if that exists all over the world, but here in the United States, our diocese kind of act as savings and loans or banks, and they use deposit accounts from diocese to lend money out. And the loan that was required was of a large enough size, and in which had the diocese requiring a high enough rate and poor enough terms and covenants that it was not sustainable from a cash flow perspective. So if it's not sustainable from a cash flow perspective, how can we create cash flow sustainability and drop that down? Well, we can bring a commercial lender in, and perhaps we can even bring a commercial lender in that might be a municipality and get us some tax-free debt, because while we're also working on our school, we can create a teacher housing facility in accordance with Texas law, which is actually a convent, and fund that as well. And then underneath that, create our own Catholic security in the form of a public bond, a public exempt bond that can be bought and sold in $5,000 increments. So the foundation can participate as a debt holder and a debt issuer, subordinate to the senior debt, and still have control over the entire process, and really reduce that cost of capital down and spread it out over a longer period of time so that the school can handle it. That's an example of how we can use our endowment, understanding what the objective is, which is cash flow as a result of leverage, and then use our endowment and bring other partners in to try to solve that problem. One other one, I think this is a quicker example, but I'm sure a lot of you have these. We have a Cristo Rey, a school in our diocese. It's been open for about 3 years. They own some property. It's a great program. And they're just doing wonderful things in Fort Worth, but they needed to pull some of the value out of the land that they owned. And but they needed the land for the school to operate the school. So we bought the property from them at a reasonable price and market value, provided them that cash, and then leased it back to them at a level that allowed for them to make debt payments that that were commensurate with what their previous, lease payments that were commensurate with what their previous debt payments would have been. So, trying to solve problems for our local Catholic community is really what we're all about. And those are just 2 examples of understanding what the objective is. Hope, prayer, all of those things, and then using your brain, using your team, using your network in order to create solutions. And look, sometimes they're not going to be there, and you can't force them, and that's okay too. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much, Clint. You're a man after my own heart. I love the part about God gave you a brain, use it. We have to be very practical. As the saying goes, pray like it all depends on God and work like it all depends on you. Anyway, I want to again remind our participants that we're taking questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. We actually have a question here. How is your investment and financing coordinated in terms of the relationship between the church and the government? Reggie or Rienzie, would you like to answer that?
I'd just like to mention that in terms of creativity and also cost cutting, something you might think of, and I'm not sure if I really answer the question, but it's to negotiate exemption of taxes on your programs. Something we did with some governments, with some tax authorities in Africa, as we did import a lot of equipment for our hospitals in Africa and also medicine. We should have paid some taxes, VAT on those. And we negotiated with those governments, local governments, that we were exempted of taxes. And in some occasion it did work, which is sometimes it's a lot of money. It's like 20-25% on the cost of what we imported. So just to think of it, and if you don't think of asking, you obviously you won't get it. So that is just an example I wanted to give on what we did to do some tax cutting with some of the governments we were operating with.
Yeah, on our end,
Thank you.
we're maximizing on, well, in the Philippines, there's a separation between the church and the state. So the government largely lucky for us, the government largely lets the church do its own thing, but there are laws and investment instruments that have been in place that give great tax benefits. So in our case, we've been investing in those tax-free investments, and of course having those tax-free savings accounts as well, that gives us less expenses on our end and then more cash flow. I'd like also to share more on the point that Clint has said earlier. I think that in the church, yes, charity is our virtue, but I think that apart from that one, we should also be professionalizing our practice more. I remember this particular case. Just to share this particular case, this is one client that I had before. It's an institutional client. So the treasurer, the priest treasurer, would want to build another building, a school building. But then again, he had some friction with his finance officer, because as with the finance officer, when he ran the figures, I mean, the church building would not bring money. In as much as the project is good, but it was intended for elementary students. But in terms of the figures, the profitability would be in high school, in middle grade school, in high school as well. So as with the finance officer, the figures, the feasibility is with that particular level and not with the elementary students, as the priest treasurer would want the school building to be built in. So I think that yes, we really have to professionalize our practice, and yes, the collaboration, the partnership, as Clint has said earlier and Reggie has said earlier, we've had a lot of professional people in our laity that's very, very much willing to give their brains in the church. So I think that this particular partnership, being partners with the laity and picking their brains out, where the figures, I mean, numbers do not die. At the end of the day, the numbers would not die. So I think that professionalizing our practice would really up our game. And apart from that one as well, I know also some religious institutions here in the Philippines, they would really lend money at no interest rate at all. I mean, and, you know, pay when able, if able. And I think that, yes, while charity is our virtue, but I think that for us to be sustainable as well, and, you know, we have to professionalize our lending practices as well. And yeah, I agree with Clint that if ever we cannot afford to lend, or in terms of when I say we cannot afford to lend, that pay when able or pay if able at all, of course, then I think that we should be bringing in some third-party lender as well, of course, with good commercial rates. So I think that we should also be professionalizing and having that partnership as well.
Thank you, Rienzie. Clint, did you want to jump in there?
I would just say here in the United States with respect to taxes, governmental relations, the church has it, well, clearly the church is a unique organization in that the local church is really dealing with the local governments and then the state governments and then the national governments, and all of those are very different. So I think that looks like that's probably a different answer for depending on where you are. In the United States, we in the Diocese of Fort Worth, we're of the opinion that in many cases, separating the diocesan finances away from government programs and from government aid can be helpful because it allows for us to operate in accordance with our faith and not necessarily be held to certain requirements that strings, if you will, that may come with certain types of funding. That's not to say that all types of funding have strings, and certainly you should look to use them if they aren't attached. But the point is this: it's the tax exempt status that we think we want to protect to the maximum extent possible. And so one way that you can do that is using the church's network for your sources of capital. You can borrow from each other and then diversify across dioceses or archdioceses. And you can very clearly do that inside of individual nations or states where the laws are homogeneous enough for you to be able to move that capital quickly and in an efficient way. And so we're big believers in that. That's one of the biggest reasons why, with the help of some folks in Chicago, we work through a unified credit facility, which created that debt structure that I was talking about with Nolan. But it allows for us to examine all of those things. Can we get some tax exempt financing? Is there some grant money that's available? Will that be a problem? Are we violating canon law? When you look to do those things, it can get relatively complicated and you have to have the right team available to do it. But certainly taxes and the relationship with the government have to be, the more and more sophisticated you get in what you're trying to do with your creativity, those are things that have to be considered and carefully considered because they can have lasting impacts.
Thank you, Clint. Clint, we have a question that's directed to you from Bill Bojan, who's he's partnering with Global Institute on a pilot project that I look forward in the future to sharing more about that. Bill's been an incredible friend to Global Institute, and I'm grateful. We actually met him in the launch of Global Institute. That's a whole another story of providence. But Clint, Bill has a question for you. How do you see leveraging the council structure and mechanism at the ground level, i.e. parishes, schools, et cetera, as part of leveraging the gifts of the laity?
Could you just repeat that one more time? You broke up just a little bit on me. So I think
I'm sorry. Yeah. So how do you see leveraging the council structure and mechanism at the ground level, i.e. parishes, schools, et cetera, as part of leveraging the gifts of the laity?
Critically important in the United, this is a canon law issue. So at different levels, it applies across the world, but parish finance councils decisions can't get made without their certainly without their consent in some cases, and in other cases it's advice. Critically important, and that's fine. That we can do things because we have to do them in accordance with canon law. But the way that we ought to approach this is let's build relationships with people at the lowest possible level. Back to what Reggie's saying, the real network at the lowest possible level to understand what it is they need to achieve. And then be honest with ourselves about whether or not we can really achieve it. I don't know whether or not a financing solution that I could or that our team could engineer is appropriate if I don't know what the parishioners at the finance council or in the parish or the diocese or whatever, gosh, you know, whatever entity, juridic person we're talking about doesn't have, without their input, I'm not going to know how to solve or fix this problem. So critically important.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think one of the things that came out consistently in our webinar series last year, which was transparency in the church, was, and we heard this from Archbishop Mujeria and Cardinal Pell, these councils, whether at the diocesan level or at the parish level, have to have really competent people put in them. They can't be people who are just going to smile and nod and they're so excited that the bishop or the pastor has appointed them to this position and they're never going to ask the difficult questions, right? And they have to be people who are fully equipped, total experts in their field, and they have to be people who are not afraid to ask the hard questions. If those people are not on the councils, then the councils aren't going to, they're not going to function, and they are not going to be of true service to the bishop, the pastor, or the faithful in general. I mean, so I think that, and that theme came through time and time again last year. And I bring it forward again. My experience in the church has been that we have to be careful to make sure that we take the best people, and those are the people who are who are not intimidated and can ask the bishop, can ask the pastor the hard, difficult questions. And those people, I mean, from my perspective, a council like that, whether at the parish level or diocesan level, is an asset, because then we're bringing together the skill set of people. Really, we're aggregating a skill set of professionals so that the bishop or the pastor has the best information possible, the best advice possible, and isn't going to, you know, run afoul because he didn't get the right input from people. But I think, I don't know, I just want to mention too, Bill posted in the chat section that there's kind of 3 principles here. And it's interesting because we're talking about financing, and yet these principles are not specifically finance. There's 3 principles: innovation, partnership, and stewardship. And it seems like these 3 principles have to be in place in order for any type of creative financing to take place and to develop. And above all, professionalism. Professionalism is absolutely essential. Now we're coming to the close of our hour. I just want to thank again our panelists, Rienzie. I want to thank Rienzie and Clint. Thank you all for dedicating your time and your professional expertise. It means a great deal to us and to all of our participants. And this is precisely what we're doing with the Global Institute of Church Management. We want people to learn leaders in the church to learn hard skills. Our classes, for example, a program of church management in Rome, they're not academic. We're teaching hard skills, and that's why most of our professors are really practitioners or academics who have a practitioner bent, because this is the time, this formation is meant to help people hit the ground running. I want to remind people that we do have an executive session starting in Rome on January 31st. So that will run for the week through February 4th. And you can get information for that at the PCM website. And we'll be sending out more information. We've been sending out information about that. So you can find it on our social, and you can find it at the PCM website. Next month, February 10th, we'll be continuing this conversation of managing the assets of the church with focusing on investment. So I urge you to mark your calendars. I hope you can join us. It will be an exciting conversation. And I want to thank again our participants for all of their expertise. We're also going to be building out, we talked about this last year, and it's taken a little while longer, but we are doing this. We're building out the content where we host the webinars for the videos of the webinars. So some of the panelists from previous webinars are actually submitting articles, blog posts, and so forth that they'd like us to add. And we will be, as we build this out, even though it's been longer coming than I would have liked. I want everything done yesterday or a week ago or 3 months ago, but it is coming, and we'll be providing those resources to you. So again, thank you for joining us. I'm Pia De Saleni, the President and Executive Director of the Global Institute of Church Management. And also, oh, I forgot, be sure if you're interested in our real estate conference in Rome, that's April 28th through the 30th with the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate at Notre Dame. Be sure to go to gicm.org and sign up for more information. Again, thank you for your time, and God bless.